the best way to express the recent conflicts of the Ukraine-Russian war. In line with this expression, as we enter the second week of January, the activity and tension on the battlefield continues to escalate. Let's dive right now into the regions where the hot breaking points are occurring on the front lines of Ukraine. Our first stop is the Donetsk region, where the conflicts are incessant. The Ukrainian armed forces continue to exist again in Bakhmut, the most critical front line in this region. With the support of the Ukrainian Air Force to the ground operation, the intensity of the clashes in the city reached its peak. To the buffer zone north of Bakhmut, Ukrainian forces sent 2 more battalions yesterday. It is claimed that the Ukrainian forces, which set out yesterday for the Russian troops on the Bakhmutska and Soledar front lines, are currently advancing in the direction of Zelenopelia. In addition, the Kiev army began to take new tactical steps along the wide line of conflict between the central city of Donetsk and Bakhmut. In fact, this new tactic of Ukraine has been seen before in Russia's Crimea and within its own borders. Yes, exactly the Ukrainian drone army we are talking about. Desiring a decisive victory, especially between Donetsk and Bakhmut, and in the areas from the northern cities of Luhansk to Kreminna and the front lines in Statova, the Ukrainian army launched attacks on Russia's military ammunition and trenches using unmanned aerial vehicles. On the death line stretching between the cities of Donetsk and Bakhmut, yesterday the drone army of the Ukrainian armed forces provided flights to the strategic Russian targets. Concentrating on the Bakhmut front line, Ukraine's drone attacks proceeded to completely neutralize the defense of the invading troops in this area. The difference in the Ukrainian drones heading deeper into the city from the direction of Opetna, that is from the south of Bakhmut, was quite striking. These unmanned aerial vehicles were of a very different type than usual, which contained an explosive device. Ukrainian forces used these drones to blow up the huge Russian military ammunition depot at Statova. As a result of the attack here, 500 Russian soldiers were killed. Now, the Ukrainian military has started using these explosive-laden drones in Bakhmut's key strategic conflict center. It has been claimed that the first target of Kiev's bomb-laden drone army was the Russian labyrinth-shaped fortifications and trenches located on Komsomolska Street near the center of Bakhmut, where barren land and wooded areas meet. The striking video footage showing Ukrainian drones dropping bombs on the fortifications of Russian troops in these areas also confirmed these attacks. Bombs falling from the drones of the Kiev army on these Russian fortifications in Bakhmut exploded violently as soon as they landed, neutralizing the invading troops in the fortification area. Russian soldiers escaping from the defense lines of this labyrinth-shaped invading troops were trying to protect themselves from bombs dropped from Ukrainian drones. However, as a result of each bomb falling from the UAVs, serious damage occurred on the surface and the invading soldiers in that area were either killed or thrown out of the fortifications with the effect of the explosion. In the 41-kilometer front area, perhaps the firsts in the history of world wars were also experienced, because while the Ukrainian forces were destroying the Russian fortifications in the forested areas in Bakhmut with drones, the Ukrainian tanks continued to fire non-stop to protect these UAVs on land and to draw attention to a different direction. It was an incredible sight of the war when the Ukrainian tanks on the Bakhmut front lines were shooting camouflaged in the wooded areas. This frame posted on social media proved how real the struggle in Bakhmut was. In addition, the Ukrainian surveillance drones were actively reporting the instant coordinated intelligence of the Russians on the Bakhmut line to the Ukrainian artillery. In the city that had turned into a complete hell, the Ukrainian forces were now operating in a more systematic and organized manner than ever before in Bakhmut. The tank units of the Kiev army, which enabled the bomb-laden unmanned aerial vehicles of the Ukrainian forces to reach their target, were trying to neutralize the invaders at the Bakhmut landline with Soviet-era Akatsiya artillery shells. As soon as the Ukrainian scout drones arrived at this tank unit, the data of the strategic trenches and assembly areas of the Russians on the Bakhmut front, the fierce attacks began immediately. Ukrainian tank units were able to fire a total of 30 Akatsiya artillery shells in only one storage. In this way, bomb-laden drones of the Kiev army flew over Bakhmut, blowing up the most critical Russian fortifications. After each explosion, the black smoke in the city's skies became more pronounced. Currently, Ukraine's bomb-laden drones continue to blow up the Russian trenches to the south and east of Bakhmut. At the same time, the Kiev tank units, which kept the invaders under the Bakhmut skies with Akatsiya artillery shells in the land operation zone, did not have a shortage of ammunition, thus ensuring the continuity of this air operation. This was the best example of the importance of the military aid provided to Ukraine, because the tank troops running out of ammunition, which took on the task of protecting the bomb drones in Kiev's Bakhmut, means that the air operation of the Ukrainian armed forces in this region will also be interrupted. But at the moment, it is known that the Kiev tank troops in Bakhmut do not have any problems with ammunition. The images of the Ukrainian soldiers in these tanks, which were reflected in the media, turned the agenda upside down. On the Bakhmut front line, the Ukrainian forces sleeping in tanks and eating their meals in these armored vehicles stated that they are on active duty for 24 hours to blow up the Russian fortifications in both the south and east directions of Bakhmut with drones. In the footage, the stove used by the Russian soldiers to warm up inside the tanks was also quite remarkable. We think that the Ukrainian soldiers turning their tanks into a house is a situation that most clearly reveals the violence and reality of the conflicts in Bakhmut. On the Bakhmut front line, Ukraine's dramatic launch of bomb-laden drone airstrikes, that is the mobilization of Kiev's drone army, forced Moscow to take some steps as well. It is claimed that the mercenaries of the Wagner Group, which are currently concentrated on the eastern fronts of Ukraine and fighting for Russia on the territory of Ukraine, set out from Blahodatna to Paraskavivka to reach Bakhmut. According to some Russian sources, there is currently a Wagner unit in Krasnohora. In line with all this data, Wagner mercenaries advancing towards Paraskavivka are expected to unite with their forces in Krasnohora and advance towards Bakhmut's northern line. With tension and excitement rising in the line of fire, it seems unlikely that Wagner's troops will affect the dramatic drone attacks currently being carried out in Bakhmut, Ukraine. Especially since the beginning of December, the Ukrainian drone army has provided Kiev soldiers with both an indescribable sight and the opportunity to destroy hard-to-reach targets. The most preferred and critical combat vehicle of this war at the moment is indisputably the drone. The Ukrainian forces, on the other hand, were able to use this game-changing combat vehicle ingeniously by modifying it, even in deportation operations. Especially in the last days of December, the drones of the Kiev army, which became the nightmare of the invading troops in the strategic military bases on the territory of Russia, are now the architects of the victories that Ukraine has achieved in the eastern and other fronts. There is actually a very key detail of the situation. On New Year's Eve and the first days of the new year, the Russians moved the air defense systems of the Moscow army, located on the eastern fronts of Ukraine, to the internal borders of Russia in order to prevent drone attacks on their territory. In this way, the Ukrainian forces began to carry out drone attacks much more easily on the eastern front. That is why the Ukrainian drones sent to Engels, Dyagilevo, and Kursk are now the main heroes of the Kiev army behind the scenes of victories on the Bakhmut front. Thank you for watching us.